Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast, hosted by Alison Humphries. The Recruitment Leadership Podcast is here to help those in the recruitment industry gain awareness and understanding on the hot topics faced by those in the business of hiring people. In each episode, Alison Humphries is joined by a fellow expert to offer professional knowledge, insight and advice on the biggest subjects affecting recruitment businesses. It's the podcast to listen to for recruitment business frontrunners seeking expert information from industry-leading advisors. Welcome to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. I am Alison Humphries. We're here to talk all things recruitment, and for the next few episodes of our podcast, you will see a big focus on business development, sales in its widest sense, which has really come to the fore as an area of priority for a lot of recruitment businesses, largely due to the current economic climate and uncertainty. In lots of cases, it's something that possibly should have been looked at sooner. Now, I'm delighted today to be joined by Ben Browning of Resonant. Ben started his recruitment life in 2007. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah.
Okay. At Robert Half, which funnily enough, I used to be a director of some time ago. You've been all over recruitment, in-house and in agency, and you now host the Recruiting Better podcast yourself. And your main business is a sales consultancy called Resonant. So Ben, you've been popping up all over the place. Could you tell us your story by way of introduction? And then we'll move on to some of our chunkier discussion about business development and what people should be doing.
Well, as you say, Resonant is a sales consultancy for recruitment businesses, and we're best known for helping recruiters create strategy and order around their kind of business development activity, so in the way they win business into something more systemized. We're kind of like a team of engineers who will help you design processes to consistently and confidently win new clients. I started in recruitment, I guess, in terms of the story, as you say, 2007. So it's like 18 years ago with Robert Half, and spent my career as a consultant, a leader, then working on an in-house project at one of the big four consulting firms before coming back into the agency environment about 7 or 8 years ago now. In the last 4 years, Resonant have worked with over 100 recruitment businesses and generated over 40 million in new business pipeline for our company, for the clients that we've worked with. And in March, we released the State of BD report, which is a dive into 35 unique insights from 500 companies, coupled with analysis from people like Neil Carberry from the REC and other industry-leading figures. That has given us a really good kind of pulse on where we are with business development today. So that might inform some of our conversation.
Yes, and I can recommend that survey and report, and I'm sure at the end we'll talk about how listeners can get it if they're interested.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we're going to talk about what we see, you and I observe that isn't happening well in business development in recruitment first. And then we're going to do a deep dive into opening your business development call, because there's quite a lot of call reluctance still. And then we'll look at the whole process of sales, successfully implementing that process. And Ben, I know you've got some contact points that you want to raise at the end. Okay,
Absolutely.
So let's start there, shall we? Ben, you go first. What are the symptoms of poor BD that you've observed and perhaps came across in your report?
The first thing to say is that the report established some really great statistics around employee engagement, recruiter engagement, and the value of sales. So 84% of the people that we spoke to, or the companies that we spoke to, said that their consultants had a positive belief about sales, and 85% had a positive belief about their value as a recruiter. So we're starting from a really strong point in terms of engagement. I guess the most stark statistic in contrast to that was the fact that 76% of recruiters say they have no clear and consistent plan for business development activity. They have no clear and consistent strategy for BD. And when we look at that across the piece, then there are other kind of elements and other data points that speak to this view that recruiters are actually still, even today, given all the challenges that we face, approaching business development in a very ad hoc, reactive kind of way. So I guess the fundamental challenge that we see in the industry is that business development is largely seen as a very reactive activity that's done kind of on the hoof without any clear strategy. So yeah, that would be my opener for that one.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a really easy to observe pattern that lots of recruiters only do business development until they get a job order, yeah, and then they rapidly switch off it. And one of our, I think we've all read the statistics about successful business development taking 7 or 8 touch points, and yet recruiters never seem to have systems that help them make that happen. So, a one-off contact is very, very easy to forget. One of the things that I've noticed as well is that there's a lack of preparation very often goes on. It's absolutely valid for people to respond tactically to information that comes across their desk. For example, a lead that they get from a candidate or taking up a reference. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of preparation in terms of thinking, how am I going to structure this call? And my observation from listening to a lot of calls at different clients of mine in different sectors of recruitment is that people know they have to ask questions. They don't necessarily know what they're aiming to do with those questions. And they don't necessarily respond to the answers logically or intelligently. And the questions, unfortunately, are very often too close to the "have you got any jobs" variety, rather than an exploration of what a client's trying to achieve. And I've said it several times on this podcast, regular listeners will know, but most clients, if they could actually achieve the business objective without hiring, would do it. And we're seeing that now as, slightly sharpened focus because of the possibilities of AI. And so recruiters who just speak to "have you got any jobs" are actually limiting both their options and their ability to advise and identify issues with the client's current arrangements.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be tempted to go further on that. I think that when we look at businesses who, we look at the landscape of recruitment business at the moment, it's getting more expensive to do business. It's getting harder to win new clients. I genuinely believe that if recruitment business leaders and their consultants have a strategy which is predicated on "let's go out and pick up jobs," they're perpetuating those challenges. Because as you say, if you aren't having more strategic level conversation, then the vacancies very quickly become that engagement very quickly becomes transactional. It means that you need to do more business development to generate a higher level of generate the same level of revenue. It means that your fill rate drops. It means that your fees drop. We see this kind of statistically across all businesses. So if your fees are lower, it's taking you more effort to win clients, and you're filling less of the vacancies that you work on, then that whole kind of ecosystem around filling jobs or pulling jobs from BD is strategically very, very difficult to support. There are environments, there are industries where that might work better, or sectors within recruitment where that might work better. But for anyone who is aspiring to get seen as a trusted advisor or an expert or build real partnerships with their clients, it's very difficult to start a partnership on the basis of doing something that is that's so fundamentally transactional.
Another one I'd point at is lack of differentiation, or it's sometimes done very poorly. I do hear people repeating things that maybe they've heard before, but if I had £1 for every recruiter who, when asked why a client would potentially use them in addition to their existing preferred supplier list, responds with some version of "because we like to build long-term relationships and we have a deep knowledge of our sector," then I would be a very, very rich woman. I do think that differentiation that's evidenced is increasingly important. here in the UK market, we have a very saturated recruitment market, don't we? And if we can't provide a reason for clients to listen to you, give you their time, point you to the right people, whatever, then, frankly, I think recruiters get what they deserve very often. And they will find it very difficult to get to further that commitment from a client other than, okay, send me your terms of business or whatever. Have you found that?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we might come on to this, but as part of the growth of Resonant, I set up the business to deliver training and L&D services to recruitment industry. What we quickly found was that most consultants actually have the skill set required to navigate a sales conversation, or at least to hold a sales conversation. What they really lack is the step-by-step, play-by-play approach. What they really lack is clear sales leadership. And the challenge that presents is that what recruitment business leaders tend to do, and what I was guilty of in my background as well, was to try and fix that with a tactical solution. So to try and look at how are people running calls, what do people sound like on the phone? But what people sound like on a phone isn't the cause of their performance. It is the symptom of a lacking strategy tier. So you talked about like lack of differentiation. Well, absolutely. Most recruiters, when you say to them, look, there are different ways to quantify this, but one way we think about it is real kind of precision positioning. We say, look, what are the specific problem sets that you solve? Who do you solve them for? And what exactly is your process for solving those challenges? Oh, and by the way, a vacancy isn't a problem. A vacancy is a fact of business, right? Any business is going to have vacancies. You cannot solve a vacancy. It's not the problem that recruiters are set up to solve. So therefore, we then look at, okay, what are the problems that clients really experience when they come to hiring? And most leaders will say that the people in their organization are at least one of their top 3 most important factors in the organization's success. And many will say it's their number 1. And yet, how many business leaders would say that the way they hire is a competitive advantage? Very few. So my perspective, at least, is that some recruiters could be saying to their audience, our role, it's not just to fill your vacancy, but it's to enable continuous improvement of your hiring strategy, so that you go from where you are today to a place where hiring is a competitive advantage for your organization. Does that matter to you? And if they say no, then they're not a potential client. But for those who do care about that, that's where kind of partnership and differentiation and value comes from. And when your consultant is armed with that story, their sales calls, regardless of whether they've been on a cold call training module, sound remarkably better because they're aligned with like a greater purpose, which, it sounds a bit bold, but like they're aligned with something that clients care about. And straight away, you're talking about a $10 million problem, not a £10,000 problem.
Right. Really well put. Thank you, Ben. And I would add to that there are clients, aren't there, who want a low touch kind of service. They really are just interested in CVs. They typically want to put a portal or some other barrier between you and the hiring manager. And look, that's a real valid part of the industry, but the fulfillment piece for that has to be delivered incredibly efficiently, because you're going to have to do a lot of activity there, aren't you?
Okay. Yeah, you've got to look at a different model for profitability there, right? The model that I aspire to, the model that most of my clients aspire to, is one where they get really sticky clients, really high fees, perhaps slightly lower volume of roles, but their fill rates are 80% plus, their fees are 25% plus, and the business keeps coming to them, and that's how they're driving profitability. But of course, there are different models across different parts of the industry.
You just touched there on a point that I was going to make about account development as well. And you being an expert in all things business development, account development is one of the places I often start when business development is failing and I'm advising the client. And an observation is that very few recruiters actually have a systematic process to develop accounts, because they've put it into the customer service box. So it's reviewing customer satisfaction for a lot of people and then just hoping, well, they're happy, they'll come back to us. Did your report also turn up anything about that?
Not in specific detail, actually, and it's definitely something we'll look to add in future iterations. As I say, this year's report, I didn't say this actually, but this year's report was the inaugural report, and we intend to run it well into the future. But let me tell you about, if I may, share an example from a client who I work with who was in exactly that situation. And what we did with them was we built a framework and a set of core activities and pillars. And what these pillars did were they enabled that business, a life sciences recruitment business with about 150 headcount. They enabled that business to visualize and score the strength of their client relationships based on 5 key criteria. I can explain what those are in a moment if it's useful. But the scoring then enabled them to track account growth. So they were really able to see, where are we making progress? They could then see, by looking at the trajectory of accounts in the whole, which accounts are stubbornly not improving, and should we be maybe investing less energy here? Which of our relationships are growing really quickly, so we should be really getting on top of that and converting that into more value, and which are showing more kind of normal growth. But being able to, one, score those accounts so they could see what was happening, and two, track those trajectories so they could see which areas they needed to double down in, gave them an incredible snapshot. It led them to include that scoring in their promotions for their account management team. It enabled them to really kind of frame their new business strategy as well, around what types of clients they wanted to bring on board based on what kinds of clients they perform well with. It really gave them a true strategic data-backed window and snapshot of this. And that was even before we layered on AI analysis as well. So yeah.
I'm sure listeners are going to be intrigued and want to know what your 5 pillars are, if you're willing to share.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an area that I don't talk about as much because new business has been such a focus. But I think, like you, I would agree, account expansion is an area where there are just quick wins. With the way that we unearth those, first of all, with the 5 pillars, the 5 pillars are time. So how much time are you spending with your client? How are you spending that time with them? Are they inviting that time? Are they giving up their time to spend with you? Number 2, engagement. What are you talking about? When you've got time with them, are you just asking them about jobs? Are you just talking about immediate hiring? Or are you talking more strategically about hiring strategy and even their company goal and their vision? Give a very specific example here quickly. A consultant called Phil, who I was working with back end of last year, was calling his clients asking, who's the best recruiter you worked with this year and why? And I said, let's flip that question from kind of a mid-score in engagement. Let's push the engagement higher. Let's ask the question instead, best supplier, or which supplier did you work with this year who created most value for your business? Because now we've stopped this conversation being about recruitment and we've made it about how can I potentially align myself with providing value for your business. So that's one way we might think about engagement. So I've got time, engagement. The third is collaboration, which means how do we work together, clearly. The fourth then is how do you capture that in loyalty? And ultimately that is captured in your terms. I don't believe in loyalty unless it's signed in blood. I'm joking, but no. But like we need to be realistic and commercial about it. So your customers loyal to you, words that say that in contract. And then the final step in all of that is advocacy. Once you've got a client who will give you their time, who will engage with you in strategic conversations, who will collaborate with you, who is committed to working with you and be loyal to you, the final part is advocacy, which means they will say great things about you. They will introduce you to their peers. They'll introduce you to their network. They'll generate more new business for you. And all of those 5 things almost work in a cascade. So if I want to improve my terms with somebody, that loyalty bucket, then first thing I'm going to look at is how well are we collaborating with them? And if that's not quite where we need it to be, then I'm going to look up the chain and look at engagement. Are we talking strategically enough? And if that's not happening, it's because we're not spending enough time together. So all of these things are kind of conjoined, and then you can build strategies out for each one.
Love that. Okay, I think that's a brilliant summation of all the aspects. Okay, so just to finish off on this sort of things that we observe, I've got a couple more. One is increasingly what I might call single objective contact. Now, look, recruiters have always been told to be clear about what they're trying to achieve. What I've noticed is a sort of unintended consequence. I think it's unintended anyway, where recruiters are calling candidates and clients with one aim only in mind. And the chances of that one aim being fulfilled vary, But, if you've got one aim, then what constitutes success, you've got much lower chance of achieving it. Let's say they're marketing a candidate, and I'm talking about by phone, they're marketing a candidate to a very select number of potential employers. And what they're looking for is to get an interview for that candidate. Nothing wrong with that. But they very often fail to ask the broader questions, like who else should I be speaking to in your organization? What kind of profile would interest you? Are there any roles that you find very difficult to hire for? Tell me how your employee value proposition is coming across through your recruit, and so on and so forth. So they have this, one goal, and it's a win or lose, isn't it? And they, without making any extra calls, I am prepared to bet that most recruiters could achieve a great deal more if they just went on to ask further questions. And the other one, lack of differentiation, lack of systems development, single objective. And okay, so I'm gonna say this. Setting yourself up for failure at the beginning of a call by not introducing yourself and establishing an agenda and credibility really early on. I'd like to just drill down on that one for a minute, and then let's widen our focus and talk about the whole business development process. I'll give you mine and you show me yours, Ben. I find that the best results come from at least opening well, and that it's important, therefore, because that is about the only bit of a call you can actually rehearse. And I find it very simple to just break down into three aspects: your hook, your turn-on phrase, your takeaway phrase, and then move into questions. The hook is what has prompted the call. People need to know that you're not just calling through random numbers, and that you've noticed something about them, that there's some preparation, something valid to take up their time. The turn-on phrase is your credibility statement: who you work with, what challenges you solve, and a point of difference. And if you can evidence that slickly, and and I'm not talking about a long speech here at all, that's great. That should be enough to intrigue people. And then there's a takeaway phrase, which is about drawing the prospect into the conversation. It's also a reality check, because it says, look, I don't know what your current situation is or what your business priorities are, but I'd really like to engage in a dialogue, and are you willing to do that? And just those three steps have, with clients I've worked with, have led to far better outcomes from the call, but also much more call willingness from the point of the recruiters.
Yeah, right.
Instead of hi, it's Alison from X. How are you today? Opening, which I'm afraid is not gonna to cut it in today's world. So there's mine. What are your thoughts on this, Ben?
The point that you mentioned around multiple aims, particularly for cold phone-based outreach, is really interesting. I think that what we tend to see is something slightly different, or at least we kind of think about a slightly different approach. I think we probably agree in sentiment, but maybe the route is slightly different here. So my sense, our experience says that often recruitment consultants are trying to do far too much work in a cold call. And a cold call, an average cold call is 47 seconds, right? So very, very brief space of time. Even a successful conversation with someone you're speaking to is going to typically run to less than 3 minutes. So when we try and think about, I used to train a methodology that had things like information gather, explore, find other points of contact, these sorts of things. Reality right now is that the other person wants to get off the phone as quickly as the consultant does. So we talk about cold call reluctance from a consultant's perspective, but it's also true from the buyer's perspective. So then we think, okay, what are the fundamentals that I have to achieve in a conversation in order to build a platform for further conversations? This is all we're looking to do with cold call, with cold outreach. All we need to be looking to do is create an environment for live to talk another day, which is a phrase from a great sales leader, a guy called Sean Sees. So where that leads us then to is this idea that the core fundamental of any cold call is going to be to ascertain that the person you're speaking to has a problem that you can solve. That is my fundamental goal. Admit that they have a problem that I can solve. And they may well have a problem I can solve, but not admit it. So I have to recognize that too. But if they do admit that they have a problem that I can solve, then I can propose a meeting. And the proposal of the meeting or further conversation will be the acid test as to whether that problem is important enough for them to take action about. So my first priority, whenever I'm making a cold outreach, is do they have a problem? And if they have a problem, I failed to book a meeting, then I can still come back to them later on and say, hey, look, last time we spoke, you mentioned that this was a problem. How's that going for you? How's that showing up in your business? But first of all, the first purpose of business development is market research. You've got a list of suspects who you think might have a problem that you solve. So our first goal has to be to ascertain whether they do or not. And the way that we do that, the way that we propose to do that is through a problem menu. So the call starts typically with a permission-based opener, something like, "Hi, Alison, it's Ben. I'm just calling you completely out of the blue here. We've not spoken before. Quickly take 30 seconds to tell you exactly what this is about, or maybe you'd rather not know." Then we progress, typically, into the menu, which might sound something like this. Leaders in your industry, I'd use the specific industry. So let's go. Senior finance leaders tell me that this year's trading conditions have been tricky, and that's meant they've needed to spend more time on reporting and clarity and more conversations with the board. However, that time has pulled them away from key projects. One thing that's frustrated that even further is that as they come to hire, they find themselves losing time and finding it difficult to assess people's quality, as well as the fact they're seeing more and more kind of AI-driven applications and those sorts of things. It may be that you haven't encountered any of that in the hiring you've done over the last 6 months. Is that the case? So I'm just inviting that conversation around, do you have one of these problems? Does this make sense for you? Is this relevant for you? And I'm also framing that in the past. Have these issues come up in the past? That way we can build a bridge to making things better for the future.
Lovely. Okay. So you're focusing there on the next stage of the call after the intro, but really interesting. Now, we've just talked, we've sort of kind of put the microscope there on sales skills and structure. Let's broaden our focus back out here, because you and I think, agreed that skills is just one part of the jigsaw in a successful sales strategy for a recruitment business. That if you're going to affect the change and success that you want, you actually need to consider much wider the influences on sales. So over to you, Ben. I know you've got a structure that you want to explain here as well.
Yeah, right. Well, look, I see the same thing. Right? People get drawn towards tactical execution around prospecting, so outreach, tools that might support that, disqualifying sales meetings, and then negotiation. Those things are really important. It's really difficult to get them right. If one, you haven't got precision positioning, so you don't know exactly which clients you should be going after and targeting that. Give an example of this, right? And people often talk about personalizing cold emails or personalizing cold outreach. Firstly, I think it's fascinating that people want to personalize the least personal type of the least personal channel that we have available to us. How do I personalize this cold email? Well, phone them or send them a letter or send them something in the post or invite them to an event. Kind of the personalization of the outreach should come through the channel more so than the messaging. But regardless of that, as the other thing, if we're not going to think about personalization, what are we going to do? We're going to think about relevance. And relevance means knowing what your clients are worried about, what they're concerned about, and most of all, actually, what they will pay for. And recruiters have this unique advantage that we can speak to our candidates. We don't need a customer to do market research. We just need candidates to talk to. You mentioned earlier that most recruiters will say that the thing that stands them apart is their market intelligence or their market knowledge. And I think that's fascinating. When I then say to them, okay, if your client was building a recruitment business specifically to serve their organization, what would their key metrics for success be for that business? Like, what would they really want that business to do? And of course, the recruiter will say how they want their vacancies filled. And I say, go on, tell me a little bit more. And I say, well, they want them filled quickly, on budget. They want to get the right person in time and on budget. I'm like, okay, cool. Go beyond that. And then we start running out of success metrics for a recruiter to really align their services to. There are 35 in the consulting frameworks that I typically create for my clients. Things like hiring manager experience, stakeholder alignment, things like time to impact, where you're tracking not just the quality of hire, but also how long it takes to get that person doing good work. All these different incremental impacts that once you understand what it is your client's looking for, you can then talk about how your approach to hiring solves for that. So I was working on this morning. It's partly why it's top of mind. We're building something out for my client, but we've got 17 steps in their process that specifically drive improved candidate experience. So when they're talking to a client who says, yeah, the thing for us is, we don't always hire people the first time we meet them. Sometimes we go on to want to re-engage them or look to hire them again in the future, but our candidate experience isn't as great as we'd like it to be. That recruitment business can now say, well, we've got 17 steps in our process. I'm not going to tell you about all 17, but here are the top 3 and what they've meant for a client of ours. So let's get this tactical execution piece in this bit of like, what should we say? But the reality is, unless we've really worked out the layer before that, which is that precision positioning, easy for me to say, around market, the problems you solve and how you solve them, then we're not giving our consultants anything to go to market with. And there's also a layer before that, but I'll pause and let you come in with any questions and thoughts on what I've shared before I go into that one.
So just to summarize then, all of this fits under the relevance heading, and you're saying that it's really important to understand who your audience is, what their factors for success are, and beyond filling a job, how they measure it, and how your solution actually is a process to deliver against that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just answer. You need to answer. We all need to be really conscious of answering the question: why does your business exist? One of the big. I was talking to my wife about this over the weekend. Had somebody approach me about training, and I'd love to work with that business, but I had to say to them, look, we don't major in training. Training forms part of what we do, but it's not our main thing. And she said to me, like, you might lose it in business. Do you think you should, just kind of say that you do training and see if you can find a way to bring them on? And I said, do you know what? Like, fundamentally, that's not why Resonant exists. That's not why my business exists. So I have to make that decision that aligns with those values, and I think that we see a lack of that in recruitment. And actually, what we don't see is a lack of the values. The values are there driving recruiters to work so blooming hard. It's the articulation of that against what their clients value. That's the gap,
Do continue, because you were on a roll there, Ben, about the whole every aspect of successful BD.
So the top end is tactical execution, right? My hypothesis, my experience is we over invest in that area. The next piece is precision positioning. We need to get that product market fit absolutely nailed on, so our consultants have the right stuff to go to market with. But before that, we've also got to think about our sales culture and beliefs. We've got to think about everything that forms the foundation of our sales team. So the culture, the values, the beliefs that we have about who we are as a recruiter, for example, what your business is set up to do at the very highest level, like create a competitive advantage in hiring for your clients, might be part of that. The next thing is then looking at your workflow, like how do you actually sell, and how does that align to your buyer's behavior, and then how do you measure your progress through that journey? So, for example, the way that we approach building a sales methodology with a company is looking at how their buyers buy, and we know that sales is the process of empowering and inspiring other people to take decisive action. That's our definition for sales, to empower and inspire other people to take decisive action. We know that a buyer goes through 6 or 7 commitment steps in order to reach that buying decision point. Those are things like they have to, first of all, admit that they have a problem, which comes back to our cold call outreach. They have to then see that, they have to commit to seeing that problem as valuable enough to do something about it. We've got, the faulty button on our dishwasher or the door that doesn't quite close or whatever it is. It's just not a big enough problem to take action on. So they've got to admit they've got a problem. They've got to then be able to see that as valuable enough to talking about. They've then got to commit to making some form of decision around, some kind of decision around determining the causes of that problem, because we can't solve a problem we don't understand the causes of. They've then got to commit to explore our potential solution and think about that. Now, sometimes some business owners, in fact, most, will also then need to make a commitment to bringing in other people to that decision-making process. And then finally, they've got to commit to taking the action that you propose or otherwise. And if we're working through that kind of sales funnel, we get to the top of that commitment ladder and we've reached a sale. Now, I, as a salesperson, and I coach this a lot, I don't mind what decision that person makes. If I'm talking to you, if you're a recruitment business leader and you come to me and you want to have a conversation about the work that we do, I don't mind what decision you take. My goal is only to support you to take decisive action. If you decide that no action is the right thing to do, I want you to have done that with an informed decision. Equally, working with us or working with a competitor would be, you've got options. If you take decisive action, then that's as good as I can hope for, because that's the only thing that I can hope to control, is that you reach a decisive outcome. So that kind of core layer here, that fundamentals, is all about aligning your process with your buyer behavior, thinking about your metrics, and thinking about the sort of the culture and the mindset that drive it all.
Wow, there's a lot there to unpack. That is so insightful, Ben. Thank you. So just to recap from my notes, getting your client to agree that they have a problem, that it's worth doing something about, that it's worth investigating and looking at causes, exploring solutions, and then committing to a course of action. So we're looking here at the principles that spin questioning is built around, aren't we? And listeners, if you're not familiar with spin, go Google it, but also talk about it, because it's something that looks very simple until you try and do it in a conversation, isn't it? So
I kind of make a recommendation there as well, just on spin. There's a brilliant book called Gap Selling. If you're a recruiter, again, and you kind of fancy that idea of higher profit, premium positioning, being seen as an expert, then gap selling will really help you find a way to apply solution selling to the way that you kind of deliver. And actually, crucial key component to gap selling is this idea of identifying a metric, which I've already kind of alluded to in part.
I don't want you to miss out anything critical, Ben, but we are going to run out of time, and I feel like we could talk all morning. Can we move on to implementation? Because I found the world of business development, in recruitment at least, is full of initiatives that start and don't get seen through. So nothing sticks, because we remain forever in the zone of discomfort, i.e. new. And we never get through to the, okay, I've learned and I've changed and I've improved. I think a good place for us to finish is, what should leaders in recruitment businesses do to actually make sure that their business development whole process sticks?
We've got to know that it starts with them. They've got to know that it starts with them. Unfortunately, I still see so many business leaders who are looking for tactical fixes and looking at, reviewing their consultants' cold calls, for example, but who don't actually have a lot of the things that we've talked about today kind of nailed down and laid out. The first building block is understanding fundamentally what are your team's beliefs about sales. How do you hold the narrative around that? How much of the narrative is around kind of framing what sales is? I frame sales largely as 80% market research, and it's only once you've completed that market research you even step into the idea of making a proposal or even thinking about kind of moving towards any kind of closing. So there's a big kind of mindset, cultural piece there. We talk about mindset a lot, but it has to be then turned into, that has to then inform your frameworks and your processes, workflows, kind of standard operating procedures. There's a brilliant book called Traction, which I know many recruitment leaders will be familiar with, by a guy called Gino Wickman, which lays out a kind of an operating system that we often follow with clients. So there's a really core piece of leadership process design that's got to be done. And when you do that, the great thing is when you do that, you unlock consultants' performance. A final kind of anecdote, like we've worked with a couple of people, but one in particular who came to us. So we were working with their leadership team to define the process. And they said, look, if we can get this right for Adam, we know he's got amazing potential because he's the hardest worker in the room. Adam went from being a 300K consultant to a billing manager, billing $1 million last year, through really the main process. The main change for him was adopting a process. That's a brilliant story. But when I spoke to Adam about what he'd done, and this is one of my episodes of my my podcast actually with Adam Tiberius, when I spoke to him about what he'd done, he said the best thing for him was having a team of 6 people, as a first-time manager with a team of 6 people, all billing round about 20K a month across an entire 12-month period, who had come into the team with relatively little experience. He just didn't need to manage them that much because the process was doing it for him. That's not about micromanagement or being heavily data oriented. It's about having a systematic approach that enabled them to do what they needed to do without having to think about it or make it up on the fly.
Right, lovely. And also, yes, you're therefore getting rid of this idea that sales is all about, the gift of the gab and quick wits. It's actually about so much more processes and systems. And I would just like to finish by adding that if you're a leader and you want to create this change, then you do need to think about what you're measuring. You cannot measure it in overnight. How many more jobs have we filled? You have to look at progress. How much more have we learned about our clients along the way to encourage people? Ben, you've been a brilliant guest. So fascinating talking to you. And I feel sure that a large number of listeners will want to get in touch with you. So how should they do that? And where can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, if you're interested in the stuff that I've talked about today, then the Recruiting Better podcast is probably worth a listen. The goal of that podcast is to interview recruitment business leaders, sales leaders, and to deliver some deep dive kind of technical how to work as well. So you get a real mix of content there. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name's Ben Browning, and as I say, the business is called Resonant. So feel free to connect and follow and look out for the content there. And what we'll also do, Alison, if it's okay, is include a link to a page that recruitment leaders can go to and book a call with me, book a blueprint call with me, which is a 30-minute kind of top level analysis of how your business development strategy is performing and whether there's a potential fit between our methodology and where you are. And if not, at least help you identify some of the gaps or things that you might be able to do to help improve profit, help improve consistency and confidence in your team, and just help drive higher performance across your business.
Okay, thank you. So multiple ways to contact Ben. And I'm Alison Humphries. If you're interested in talking to me about working with you as a non-exec director, stroke board advisor, and a look at the whole of your business, including business development, you can reach me on alison@recruitmentleadership.co.uk. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, listeners, for joining us yet again. And we look forward to our next podcast. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You've been listening to the Recruitment Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, review, and share so that others can find the podcast too. We really appreciate your support. If you have any questions about the topics covered or wish to find out more about recruitment leadership, please email alison@recruitmentleadership.co.uk, referencing the podcast. We're also on LinkedIn, where you can follow Recruitment Leadership and connect with Alison Humphries. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us next time for another episode of the Recruitment Leadership Podcast.